Hi Farooq. Hi. How are you?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me? Am I audible?
Great. So,
Right. So Farooq, welcome to the conversation. I'm Siddharth from Kitabi Karwan, and welcome to Bakstage. I'm so excited to have this conversation with you, and I'm pretty sure everyone's excited to hear you as well.
I'm I'm honored to be here. Thank you.
Right. Okay. So Farooq, I'll just kick this off with a very, very simple question. I think one question which I always want to ask people who write their autobiography, and I know you've spoken about this on other interviews, is what particularly I know got you to write your autobiography at this point of time in your life? Like, what kind of inspired you to start to like document this? Despite writing the initial three trilogies where you tried to give a
Y-
fictionalized version of things that have happened in your life, why this and why now?
Okay, I'll tell you. It wasn't an inspiration, and it wasn't voluntary until my agent and publishers said to me, "We want your autobiography." I said, "Hang on, I've written three books called Pune Company, Cambridge Company, London Company, and they trace a bit of my life and adventures and so on and so forth." They said, "Yeah, yeah, but those are fictionalized." fictionalized. And I said, "Yes, they are fictionalized. They're stories." They said, "No, no, we want the truth, warts and all. And besides, you haven't written television company, you haven't written about writing, you haven't written about writing films, you haven't written about V.S. Naipaul, and most of all, you haven't written about Charles Sobraj, right? Uh,
Right.
and your action. So we want the truth and we want an autobiography." I thought to myself, God, when they want an autobiography, do they think I'm about to die or something? You know. And then I thought, no, plenty of people write autobiographies. Philip Roth is not. Rudyard Kipling wrote something of myself at a particular time, and he wrote many books afterwards. Okay, I'll get down to it, I said. And so the commission came through. And when the writer gets a commission and there's something to say, like all the stuff that they mentioned, my personal relationships to an extent, to the extent that the public is interested in it. And then this the quite interactions with Naipaul and Charles Sobraj, and I suppose quite an adventurous, if not very significant, time in television, in films, in writing, and tell people how it came about. So that's how this time and this place.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, so that's quite an interesting anecdote, Farooq, because well, it is true that while reading more about your latter life, particularly your interactions with Sir Naipaul and Mr. Sobraj, would have been very interesting for people. But I'll just take a step back and go back
Yeah.
to your earlier days.
Yes.
You mentioned you'd gone off to engineering college and run away after the first year, and this has been
Exactly.
traced in some of your books.
Yes.
So, what was it that particularly you know drew you towards writing? I mean, I know it initially wasn't something that you were particularly up for. You were got into activism, or as far as I know, what was
Yes.
your first jump into the world of writing, and what was your inspiration towards it?
Siddharth, I always wanted to be a writer. I'll tell you why. Because as a child, I wasn't very physical, if you know what I mean. All my cousins were boxers, footballers, cricketers. When I got into the nets at school for cricket, batting, I would not try and hit the ball, I'd try and dodge the ball so it didn't hurt me, you know. Uh, and playing hockey, I'd trip over my hockey stick and so forth. And so being useless at uh, the only thing I could do was run. Uh, I suppose from fear of things. Uh, I was no good at sports and that. And the only thing I could do, and the only thing I got attention for, was telling stories or making up anecdotes. And so I thought, at a very early age, I thought this is something I can do and I want to write. So even in college, I started writing poems and little articles and this, that, and the other. Always wanted to be a writer, in that sense. But I didn't quite know that that I would be allowed to write or I could write. My father was a military man. Yeah, he was in the
Mhm.
army. in the Indian Army, and he said, "No, no, no. Writing is a hobby." I said, "Well, you can't say that to Charles Dickens. It wasn't his hobby." And my dad said, "Don't be clever. Don't be so smart." I said, the writers are." He said, "You can write on the side, write when you have something to say." Okay, but I always wanted to be a writer. The only way I could get out of India on a scholarship, if I said I want a scholarship to a writing, they wouldn't have, no scholarship would have given me the money to go to Cambridge to read English or study creative writing. At least I didn't think so. So I was also interested in science. So I came I did science as a degree in India, in Pune, and I came to Cambridge to do natural sciences. And I actually graduated in my first 2 years at Cambridge in natural sciences, in quantum physics, right? Uh, but I still wanted to write. And I was trying to write all through my undergraduate days at Cambridge. And then I came out. Nobody wanted anything that I wrote. I was trying to send short stories to agents and people. One of my friends said, "Send a short story to, because he's my agent, to Lawrence Pollinger." Now, I knew that Lawrence Pollinger was D. Lawrence's agent, and I thought, fantastic. So I sent 3 stories, and he sent them back saying, "Knock on my doors again," And I thought, oh God, great disappointment. Then I started in my activism, political activism. I started writing little sketches in our political newspaper, Rag. We used to sell this propaganda newspaper, and a gentleman called C.L.R. Jain, right, a great uh, philosopher, cricket writer. I've written his autobiography later, but he came to address us, about 200 of us in a hall, and he said, "Who writes this newspaper? Why are you writing all this Leninist rubbish? Why don't you write about what you actually do?" Right? And so he turned to some guy and said, "What do you do?" He said, "I'm a bus conductor." He said, "Well, what happens on the buses?" He said, "What happens on the buses? Why don't you write about that?" He said, "You face some customer, some drunkard, some racism, some driver, you face accidents, whatever, right?" And he turned to other people, somebody who worked in a hospital, somebody who was unemployed. And I said, "School teacher." He said, "Write what happens in schools." So we transformed our newspaper. We transformed the newspaper into, people telling their own experiences. And in that, every week I write 500 words happened in my school. How some black boys came looking for a girl because she had quit and joined somebody else's girlfriend, and there was a fight and all that sort of stuff. So, somebody, some kid, crazy, threw a bench at the art teacher, right? And so you write about that. And after about 20, 30, 40 of these articles, a fellow turned up at my staff room, in school. He said, I went to the door. He said, "Farrukh Dhondy." And I said, "Does he owe you money?" And he said, "No, no, no." I said, "Are you from the police?" And he said, "No, I'm not from the police." He said, "I'm a publisher. I'm from Macmillan's, and I want to talk to you." And what about? He said, "Well, you write these articles. I read your stories in Freedom News, in your rag newspaper." So I said, "How do you get anonymous?" And he said, "I asked the guy who sells the newspaper, I asked him, and a fellow called Farrukh writes them, a fellow called Farrukh. And there couldn't be very many, he said, called Farrukh in the Inner London Education Authority." So he tracked me down. I was the only Farrukh in the Inner Education Authority. So he found my school. I said, "What do you want?" And he said, "I want to publish those things in Macmillan's as a book." I said, "But those are only 500 word sketches. You are looking at the Ernest Hemingway of India." And he said, "What?" I said, "I'll write you proper short stories." And so he put out a contract, yeah, on the spot. Just that's luck. That's the way it happens. And I thought, wow. I've never seen 200 pounds in my life, right?
Mhm.
Altogether, I mean. And so I signed the contract, and in a few months, I had written my short stories, and they published them as East End at Your Feet, my first book, right? And then they asked for another book, then they asked for a third book. Yeah. And then I wrote Pune Company, and they said, hang on, this is not about Britain, this is about Pune. But another publisher, like a big publisher, said, I'm lapping it up. Then by that time, a friend told me, write a get an agent. Then I quit teaching, began writing full time. That's how it all happened. All, all being in the right place at the right time. Good luck. Yeah.
Well, that's a very fascinating story, Farooq, because while you were narrating it, it actually got me thinking about how things have changed. Because the way you went about this is, I mean, you were lucky that your work was discovered by your publisher, and you got
Absolutely.
your
Yes.
break. And we're lucky that this happened, and we've been introduced to your work. But it's a very different scenario today, right? We live in a far more
Yes.
democratized world where the ability to get your word out there is so uh, well,
It's difficult. I
it's
know.
so
I
simple,
know.
it's so free, right? So what's your take on that, like this modern day concept of, say, blogging and these micro poems, and you know people writing Twitter threads where I know you want to say as much as you can in the least possible amount of words. uh, what's your take on this form of expression? Like, are you a
Right.
fan
There
of the
are
medium? Do you think it takes away from it?
no. I'll tell you two things. Right. One, I won't write a blog. Right.
Hmm.
For two reasons. One, I won't get paid for it, and and two, it's not being edited. So I don't know whether a blog is a pure piece of vanity, right? When I write a film or when I write a book, there's some editors look at it, they say this is not good, don't want this, no reader will want to see it, or something or the other, right? So it is edited through the filter of experienced people. Bloggers are mostly, I mean, some of them might be absolutely brilliant, but they are mostly people who, I don't know, want to speak to the world without anybody editing their words, their thoughts, or even considering whether anybody wants to read it. I know that people pick up what 1,000 viewers, readers, million viewers, right? Especially if they're famous and they have a different Madonna and write a blog. People wants to know what Madonna thinks. I don't want to know. I don't give a khotti damri, as we say in Parsi. I don't give it a pie for what Madonna thinks, or any other actor or actress, by the way. But that's why I think a blog has opened up the expression of the world, but it's not edited, and that's why I don't read them. I don't want to know, I don't want philosophical thoughts which aren't really philosophy. And I mean, people like Deepak Chopra and so on, talk a lot of nonsense and pretend it's philosophy. And, from Plato onwards, we've had philosophers. The Upanishads have philosophy in them. Yeah. Our epics are philosophical. Even, the Arthashastra people are philosophical. But I'm afraid somebody who tells you wake up in the morning and take 6 deep breaths is not philosophical, just talking nonsense, right? That's
No,
my
that's
take
a
on it.
that's a fair criticism, actually, and that's actually one of the most vigorous criticisms I think social media and any forms of online uh, writing kind of receives, or any form of expression receives, that
Yeah,
there is a lack of quality check, and that kind of takes away from what is being marketed under a particular genre. But
yeah,
let me just pivot the
yeah.
conversation a bit to one of, and I think I'm pretty sure this is something everyone's always asked you about,
Tell me.
your equation with Sir V.S. Naipaul, right?
Ah,
And I mean, I've read about how initially he was, I mean, it was a very let's say a cold encounter to begin with, or things
absolutely.
weren't pretty smooth. But
My dear, he was totally contemptuous of my views because I have socialistic views, and he was ultra conservative uh, in most of the things that he thought. Right. And so at first we were at a conference together. Yeah. And I spoke from the platform and he spoke from the platform. And we got off and there was a party. I think it was Warwick University. I can't remember so long ago. And we were having a drink and this and that. And he called one of my friends and said, your friend, that Farrukh Dhondy, is a rascal, isn't he? He doesn't believe anything, does he? And my friend Mahmood said to him, but he said what he form. And he said, exactly, that's what I was saying. It's an excuse for not believing anything. Yeah. And then so he made a mistake. And when I was at Channel 4, BBC called me up and said, Vidya Naipaul, the latest book. I said, yes, I've got it in A Million Mutinies now. And he said, will you review it? And I said, how? And he said, on the book program, we give you half an interview with your Naipaul. And I said, okay, I'll do that. But does Vidya know that you're interviewing him? He said, yes, we fixed up the interview. Right. What happens is, 7 o'clock in the morning, my bloody phone rings. I pick up the phone and he says, this is Vidya Naipaul. I said, yes, Mr. Naipaul. And he said, I believe we have to speak on the television tonight. I said, yes, we are. And he said, what should we speak about? And I said, about your latest book, right? And he said, yes, what about it? And I said, well, it seems for your other books on. He said, oh dear, already me books, right? And I said, yeah. And he said, what else? And I said, well, there are sometimes criticisms have been leveled against your books, and I'd like to consider those. I'd like to consider them myself, blah, blah. He said, yes. And he switched off, right? I get to my office and calls me and says, Vidya has withdrawn from the interview. Why? He said, because he called you this morning and you said, Negroes don't like your books. And I said, I didn't say anything of the sort. I don't use that kind of language. And I'm not, I said that his books have faced some criticism and I'd like him to answer. Don't like books. Right? And he said, anyway, it's drawn. I said, okay, so it's off, right? I'm not on air. He said, no, you're on there for half an hour to say what the hell you like about his book. We've let him not be there. You speak straight to the camera. I said, okay. Half an hour, your agent, Gil Aitken, called me and said, Vidya wants to be interviewed. He's agreed to give you an interview because he doesn't want you to say what the hell you like about his books. So he came on. Vidya came on, and he was very cold with me, right? I was very kind of, I don't know, being a chela, talking to him, talking to him completely respectfully about how I'd first encountered these books and how, again, I said that India mutiny, A Million Mutinies now. I didn't say what I said in the morning. I said, your views have kind of evolved, I said, and he grunted and grunted. He answered some things. And then I brought first editions of his book. I said, will you sign these? He said, I'll sign one. And he signed one, and then he pushed off. And the producer said, good, great interview. But yeah, and then I didn't meet him at all until Gil and Aitken, the called me and said, Farrukh, I'd got to know Gil a bit. Said, Vidya wants to have lunch with you. I said, why does Vidya want to have lunch with me? For God's sake, he hits my guts. And he said, no, it's all changed. His wife, he's married. I said, yeah, I read in the papers that he married now from Pakistan. I don't know them, but I don't know her. But said, no, she loves your work. She's read your book. She read your columns, and she wants to meet you. So he's agreed. And I said, where? He said, at Bibendum, which is quite a class restaurant in London. I thought, going to give me champagne, caviar. Great, I'm going to be with them. So, so I went. I turned up, and he was very glum. Gillen was there. Nadira was there. Very was extremely glum. I said, "What have you been doing? Tell us where." And I said, "Well, last week I was in Jamaica." And then I told the story of Jamaica. We were shooting at a hospital, at an emergency hospital there in Jamaica. And I went to the crew one morning to the hospital, and we went into the yard, and there was a big guy, a security guard sitting at the gate. He said, "UD film crew." And I said, "Yeah." He said, "Well, you can't go in." I said, "But we got passes, we go in every day." And he said, "No. You have to film me first because I am the next coal of Jamaica." I said, "Really?" And then he said, "Yeah. I said, "Okay, this fellow will let us in after we film him." So he started speaking, Mona Lisa. Yeah, quite a good voice. He was singing a song. Then the gunshots rang out outside the compound. Bang, bang, dot. And in half a minute, he started saying, we started ducking for cover, the cameraman moved on. He said, don't mind them boys, carry on, right? Mona Lisa. And this, in half a minute, two guys came in carrying a fellow with bullet wounds in his guts and all this, right, bleeding, and brushed past the guard, and he was still trying to, sing his bloody Mona Lisa. When we rushed after him, went inside. I told this story at the and Vidya was laughing his head off, right? And that was when everything changed. I was invited to his farmhouse in Wiltshire, and we used to meet regularly, and he'd rely on me for this, that, and the other, all sorts of things.
Yeah. That's such an interesting story, particularly the Mona Lisa bit. And while you were talking, so I'm a law student by training. I mean, I don't practice law, but the only parallel that would come in my head was this cute story that I'd read about Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg and Justice Scalia. Both were judges of the U.S. Supreme Court and were on opposite ends of the spectrum, but their friendship was one of the legends where they were the bestest of friends, and they had and always had opposing views on things. So this is quite interesting hearing this about Sir Naipaul from you as to how that relationship transformed from one to the other. But Farrukh, I'm quite curious as to I mean, you've worked for television, you've written for television, you've written for films. Is now that, because it's the most happening thing in that space, is OTT something that suits your fancy? Do you think is that a medium that calls to you to write?
Well, it has actually transformed television. It has transformed the way people look at things. And actually, I must admit, I work for MX India, MX Player, as a consultant, right? Times of India's MX Player. They send me scripts to work on, to suggest, to approve, to doctor, to make comments on, and so on. So as a consultant, I work for MX Player. The thing about OTT is that because of the medium, it has a very particular kind of format. If you can't grab the audience in the first 5 minutes, forget it, because they'll switch off. Yeah? You have to choose your audience. And this is not the same as writing books or films. In films, what happens is people pay their money and sit in the cinema, and when they pay their money, even if 5 minutes don't interest them, they'll carry on to see what Paisa Rasool. So the OTT platform, they can switch their phone off, they can switch their video off, and so you have a formula for writing OTT platforms. You have to have a cliff after every episode and so on, so that they watch the next episode. So it has defined a new form, and it has become very popular. It has given rise to a lot of interesting work. Some of it complete garbage, but a lot of interesting work also, I think.
Right. No, I mean, I get what you mean, because I think one of my first experiences reading something was Mr. Salman Rushdie was, forget which book it was, whether it was Midnight Children or
Yeah,
Titanic Verses, where
yeah,
for I think the first 30 odd pages, he's describing this man who's praying in the snow, and there's a drop of blood flowing down his nose. And as voracious a reader as I am,
yeah,
I was stunned after the first 20 pages that, I mean, this is the time he spent on this. I could
yeah.
not imagine this in an OTT format happening, right?
You can't have
Where
that. You can't have that.
you have a scene going on for 10 minutes focusing on a man doing nothing but just bending
No.
and praying.
Yeah, yeah,
Right.
yeah, yeah. I understand that. I understand that.
Mm.
There's a satirical magazine called Private Eye,
Right.
right? In Britain. It's a
Mhm.
very prolific magazine, very popular magazine. They ran a competition. It was called what was it called? The 35 test. If you
Mhm.
can get past 35 pages of a Salman Rushdie book, then you win
Mhm.
the prize. You know. So that just to make fun of poor Salman. But there we are. So no, you can't have that in an OTT platform. You've got to capture the attention with something or the other. It could be sex, it could be drugs, it could be rock and roll, it could be murder,
Right.
mostly,
Right.
mostly
And
murder, suicides, this and the other.
more often than not, it's just a mix of all these. But
All
sure.
yeah,
But speaking of
yeah,
Mr. Rushdie, that actually brings me to another area which I wanted to talk to you about.
yeah, yeah,
Is I'm pretty sure that, and I mean, I like to believe this, right? I believe that most writers are good readers as well, right? They're voracious
yeah.
readers. They consume. I mean, and it might not just be readers; they might be consumers of any art form in general. But what's if I put it in a very in the language of a bar? What's your poison? What's the kind of books? What are the books you read? What are the authors you read? Are there any particular authors you think have influenced you as a writer or your writing style?
I don't think that I've learned a writing style or anything. I think every writer has to be uh, completely individual, right? You've got to be fresh. You've got to write from your life. But of course, I learn a lot of things about my life, about other people's behavior. And I'm fascinated by books. I read Salman stuff. I read, you know, uh, all the people who be considered contemporary greats, right? There are some books that I can't read. I mean, if I've read three or four, what do they call it, chick lit, I've had
Mhm.
enough, right? I've
Right.
had enough of it because I I know that they're very good or very popular or whatever, but they don't interest me. And you only read what interests you. So, but I go back to the classics all the time. Uh, I mean, this may not be a popular choice, but I've been for the last three books I've been reading here, Rudyard Kipling. I'm
Mm.
reading Kipling's From Sea to Sea even
Mm.
now, right? And it's fascinating. Uh, of course, there are limitations in the modern consciousness. There are limitations to Kipling's particular imperialist attitudes. People call him a racist, but I don't think he's a racist. I think he's an imperialist. Uh,
Mhm.
and I'm reading the third book now of Kipling's in succession, and then of course I go back to some history books. I don't much read modern Indian fiction. I haven't, I'm afraid. Uh, and somebody asked me recently on an interview, said, "You said somewhere you read modern fiction to feel superior," and I said, "Well, that was a joke, right?" But yes, but yes, I do. So, but yeah, I haven't gone back to Dickens, but I'm dying to read Great Expectations again. And
Ah,
of course,
that's. Mhm.
yeah, and I've been reading. I mean, for God's sake, it might sound pretentious, but I've been reading the Mahabharata, and I've been reading Measure for Measure, and certain plays that I don't know very well of Shakespeare's. You know,
Right. Well, that's quite interesting, Farooq, because first of all, I would like to ask you, which version of the Mahabharata are you reading? Are you reading it in a particular language, like in Hindi or
no, I'm
Sanskrit?
reading.
Or
I'm reading Mr. Menon's translations in English,
okay.
right? Published by Rupa. Very good. Yeah,
Right.
the Ramesh Menon's
Right.
uh,
But you also
volume.
mentioned that.
I've read them before, and I'm reading them again.
Mm.
Yeah,
No, that's a brilliant series to reread, because personally I am a huge I know
yeah,
I know what the correct phrase for it is, but I've read the Mahabharata a couple of times, and it's something
yeah,
that always fascinates me in terms of its depth. I always discover something new in each
absolutely.
each
Yeah,
attempt I read it, and
brilliant
yeah, it's a
stories in it. Yeah,
storehouse of knowledge. But I have just a couple of more questions before we wrap this up.
yeah.
Actually, before that, I would like to open this for questions by the audience as well, right? So if
Okay.
anyone wants to ask Farooq a question, you can just raise your hand while we keep this conversation going. I'll recognize you, and you can ask Farooq the question directly, and you can also like drop in comments in the chat box, which is visible to Farooq and everyone else, so we can keep the conversation going. Well, Farooq, my question to you was, you mentioned that you don't read a lot of modern Indian fiction, but
No.
anything that over the past 15, 20 years that has particularly caught your eye of either of Indian origin or by an Indian author? Uh,
Well, you know, I've, when I say I don't read any of it, I do read some. I mean, I've picked up Billy Dalrymple's books, right?
okay.
His stuff. Uh, I've read a few, um, like modern novels, and I read. What did I read? I read something by a lady called Ruby Lal called Empress about Noor
Mhm,
Jahan. You know,
mhm,
that sort of thing interests me. The history interests me in that sense. Yeah.
mhm.
Uh, what else can I say? I do keep up with people who write about India, even if they are not Indian, right?
Yeah.
The other one I read is by uh, uh, by Ira Mukhoti, Daughters of the Sun. Yeah,
Right, right.
but you must have heard of it. So I read that. I will read that kind of historical stuff in
Mhm.
from India. Yeah.
It's actually interesting that you mentioned Miss Mukherjee, because and that you mentioned the Mahabharata, because she's just come out with her first novel, which is titled The
Ah,
Song of Draupadi, which is a very, very interesting take about the Mahabharata. It's
I'll get hold of it. I'll get
I think you'll enjoy it. Well,
what
Farooq, from my
Draupadi?
end,
Sorry, did you
there's
say
just one more
Draupadi?
question. Yeah, The Song of Draupadi. I'll text you the name after the
So
interview.
that would be the Ramayana, wouldn't it?
Uh, I'm sorry,
Sorry, hang on. Yes, please.
Ramayan. That Draupadi would be from the
From
Mahabharata.
the wife of the Pandus. Yeah,
Yes,
yeah, yeah.
yes. So, my final question for you is actually one of the ones which I ask all the time, and it's actually
Tell me.
I'll frame it in a very different light for you right now, because uh, so I think an experience that I've spoken about to a few authors and even from people from different fields is,
Yeah.
particularly for someone who's written an autobiography, right? It is exposing a lot of yourself for the world to view. It's a very vulnerable position you
Yes,
put yourself in, and
maybe. Yeah.
okay. So, what is it that kind of inspires you to reach that position, to be able to demonstrate yourself in this manner where your life is laid down by you in front of people, and it's fairly honest in terms of the feedback that comes in from different people? How do you get there? What kind of inspires you or pushes you to be able to write about everything in your life so openly?
Uh, I don't know if I've done that.
Hmm.
Um, I when I called it Fragments Against My Ruin, right? Um, I was considering. I began to think that if I wrote every damn thing that I've done, it may not be of any interest to the public, to the reading public, right?
Hmm.
Because I'm not a celebrity. I'm just a writer. You know, when Kabir Bedi. Oh, by the way, I read Kabir Bedi's book backwards. I read Dolly Thakur's book backwards, right?
Hmm.
The biographies. I forgot. You asked me what did I read in the last 6 months, and those are the two things I read: Dolly Thakur's autobiography, and Kabir Bedi's. Now, Kabir Bedi is a celebrity, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
He can, yeah, because people know who he is and what he does, and So he's written extremely frankly about his encounters with women, this that, and the other. I don't think anybody would be interested in my encounters with my personal encounters, because why would they care? You know,
Mhm.
Sobraj, yes. Naipaul, yes. C.L.R. James, perhaps. Politics, yes. Boris Johnson, maybe. But uh, and of course, I mentioned the relationships in my life and the children I've had and so on. But uh, didn't go into much detail because I don't know whether the public would be interested in that at all. Yeah.
Right.
Uh,
Well,
so
that's quite fair, Mr. Farooq.
yeah,
And well, I have one. So I keep saying I
good,
have a last question, but I keep
good.
coming up with one.
You know,
But
good.
what's next from your pen? What can we expect? Anything that we'll see on the screen,
Yes,
or anything I will see in
yes, yes,
a
yes,
book?
yes. I have written now, which is published in Britain this week,
Mm-hmm.
and will be published in January in India, a book
Mm-hmm.
called Hawk and the Hyena, which is my complete memoir of my interaction with Charles Sobraj.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not that chapter in Fragments Against My Ruin in the autobiography. It's a complete book about what he told me, what his wife told me, about their past, about what he did in prison,
Mm-hmm.
um, and then the continuing relationship in which he tried to get me involved in all sorts of rubbish. I
Right.
introduced him to a person who'd written a biography of the history of the CIA because
Mm-hmm.
he wanted to know somebody in the CIA. Why? You'll find out if you read the book. At the end of this, I tell you how that happened. Um, there was a series, Netflix and BBC, called The Serpent, right?
Right.
About Charles Sobraj. At the
Uh-huh.
end of the series, there's a caption says, "Nobody knows why he went to Kathmandu and courted arrest or whatever." And that's wrong, because I know exactly why he went. And the book tells you. This short book called The Hawk and Hyena, or Hawk and Hyena, it will be out in January in India. So I've finished with that. Then my translation of Hafiz comes out soon from
Mm-hmm.
HarperCollins, right?
Right.
I've written a children's book which I don't know if anybody will be interested in, called The Freezies, um, published in Canada. So it's been a productive year. Uh, I've kept going after the autobiography, if you know what I mean. Yeah.
But- Well, that's quite interesting, and I'm really looking forward, particularly to the Hawk and the Hyena, which comes out in
Yes.
January.
January.
And yeah, as you told me, you'll be here for the Jaipur Literary Festival if everything goes well with
If yeah,
Omicron rising and
if
everything.
yes,
Yes, but
if
if it
Omi
does go
subsides,
through,
they're
yes,
still writing to me. Yeah. Uh, and saying we look forward to having you on the platform and so on. But I don't know whether they won't cancel the festival because but they might cancel the foreigners coming to the festival. I don't know. Let's see.
right, right. Okay, well, Farooq, this was
Dekha
a
jayega.
pleasure talking to you,
Right?
and I hope to meet you at JLF if and at all that happens, because I'll be there, and mostly all bibliophiles across the world who would want to attend it.
How
But
wonderful.
yeah,
Yeah.
this was a great chat with you. Thank you so much for joining us on
Siddharth,
Backstage.
look forward so much. Okay. Bye. Bye now. Thanks.